Welcome back to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. Tonight, we step into the velvet shadow of the Victorian parlour, where grief wore black. Mirrors were covered, clocks were stopped, and the dead were sometimes brought before the camera one final time. This is the strange and sorrowful story of why Victorians photographed their dead. In the 19th century, death did not hide itself politely behind hospital curtains. It came into the home, sat by the hearth, climbed into the nursery, and lingered in the smell of wax, lavender, medicine, and rain-soaked wool. The Victorians lived in an age of invention and industry, of steam engines, iron bridges, gas lamps, and empire. Yet beneath all that progress was an intimacy with death that modern eyes can scarcely understand. Children died with terrible frequency. A fever could take a baby before its first birthday. Consumption could hollow out a daughter over many pale months. Childbirth could turn a bedroom into a place of mourning. Infection, cholera, diphtheria, scarlet fever, accidents in factories, accidents in streets, accidents in homes. Death was not an occasional visitor. It was almost a member of the household. And when death came, the Victorians did not always turn away. They looked, they dressed the body, they brushed the hair, they arranged the hands, they placed flowers around the bed, or positioned the departed in a chair, as though they had merely fallen into a deep and delicate sleep. Then, sometimes, they summoned a photographer. To us, the idea seems grotesque. A dead child propped beside living siblings. A mother holding an infant who will never open its eyes again. A husband seated beside a wife whose face has already begun to leave the world. We see these images now and feel a cold disturbance, as if the past has reached through the paper and touched our wrist. But to the Victorians, these photographs were not horror. They were remembrance. Photography was still new, still wondrous, still almost magical. Before it, most ordinary people had no portrait of themselves or their loved ones at all. Painted portraits were expensive luxuries, the privilege of wealth. But the camera changed that. For the first time, a working family might possess the exact likeness of a child, a spouse, a parent, not an artist's interpretation, but the actual face, preserved in silver and shadow. And sometimes, cruelly, the first chance to capture that face came only after death. Imagine a Victorian mother whose little boy has died before anyone thought to take his portrait. There are no home videos, no birthday snapshots, no phone gallery filled with half-blurred smiles. There is only memory, and memory is a treacherous thing. It softens at the edges, it alters the mouth, it loses the precise curve of the cheek. It forgets, even when love is desperate not to forget. So the photographer arrives. The room is quiet. The curtains are drawn to control the light. The family speaks in whispers, not because the dead can hear, but because grief makes sound feel violent. The child is dressed in his best clothes. Perhaps a toy is placed beside him. Perhaps his mother supports him from behind, hidden beneath a dark cloth, becoming part of the furniture of mourning. The camera stands like a solemn instrument at the foot of the room. The exposure takes time. Everyone must stay still. The living tremble. The dead, of course, do not. That is one of the reasons some post-mortem photographs appear so unnervingly clear. The deceased may seem sharper than the living, whose grief-blurred bodies shifted ever so slightly during the long seconds of exposure. In some images, the dead are shown honestly, laid out on a bed, surrounded by flowers, eyes closed, unmistakably gone. In others, they are arranged to look alive. A child may be seated upright. A young woman may be posed with a book in her lap. A painted glimmer may be added to the eyes. Cheeks may be lightly tinted. The illusion is not always convincing. Often, it is the failure of the illusion that chills us most, the stillness beneath the costume of life. There is something deeply uncanny in a face, asked to perform one final social duty, yet that uncanniness belongs more to us than to them. Victorian mourning culture was elaborate, structured, and intensely symbolic. Mourning clothes, black crepe, jet jewelry, hair lockets, memorial cards, funeral biscuits, death notices, veiled mirrors, and carefully observed periods of grief all formed part of a ritual language. Death had etiquette. Sorrow had costume. Loss had objects you could hold. A post-mortem photograph was one of those objects. It was not merely a picture. It was proof that someone had been here. Proof that the beloved body had once occupied space, worn clothes, had weight, texture, presence. It gave grief a surface. It made absence visible. Queen Victoria herself helped shape the age's obsession with mourning. After Prince Albert died in 1861, she wore black for the rest of her life and turned widowhood into a public theatre of devotion. Her grief became imperial fashion. Across Britain and beyond, mourning became not only private pain, but a social performance, an outward sign of loyalty to the dead. But beneath the lace and ritual was something far older than Victorian taste. The fear that the dead might disappear completely. That fear is ancient. It hides in tomb paintings, death masks, wax effigies, funeral statues, and locks of hair preserved in lockets. Every age has tried to defeat death by keeping an image of what it took. The Victorians simply had a new machine for an old human ache. The camera seemed to conquer time. It did not merely describe a face, it captured it. That was the miracle. A person could vanish from the world, yet remain in a little case lined with velvet, their likeness waiting to be opened by candlelight. The dead could be held in the hand, and perhaps that is why these photographs feel so haunted. Not because they show corpses, but because they show love, refusing to accept the rules. Look closely at a post-mortem photograph, and the horror begins to change shape. The first reaction is discomfort. The second is pity. Then, if you stay with it long enough, something more painful emerges. You begin to see the hands of the living, the careful collar, the combed hair, the flowers chosen, the mother's sleeve, the father's unbearable stillness, the siblings told to sit beside what they do not yet understand. These are not images of death alone. They are images of people trying to survive death's aftermath. Of course, not every strange Victorian photograph is post-mortem. Modern internet law has exaggerated the practice wildly. Many ordinary portraits are mistaken for death photographs simply because Victorian people often looked stiff, stern, or pale in long exposure images. Headrests and posing stands were used to help living subjects remain still, not usually to hold up corpses like macabre puppets. The truth is less theatrical and somehow more moving. The dead were not usually dragged into elaborate scenes for spectacle. More often, they were placed gently, solemnly, as part of a final ritual of memory. Still, there is no denying the eeriness. There is the baby who appears asleep but will never wake. The young woman seated in her finest dress, her face too calm, too settled. The family portrait where one figure seems impossibly still, as though the room itself knows the secret. There is the dreadful tenderness of a parent holding a child, whose body has become both precious and impossible. These photographs ask something uncomfortable of us. They ask whether our own age is truly less strange. We do not photograph our dead in parlors, not usually. We hide death away. We outsource it to hospitals, funeral directors, sterile rooms, sealed coffins. But we keep the last voicemail. We scroll through old videos. We speak to inactive social media profiles. We preserve text messages from people who will never answer. We enlarge photographs for funerals and place them beside flowers. The technology has changed, the need has not. We still ask images to do impossible work. Stay, prove, remember, bring them back. The Victorians photographed their dead because love had nowhere else to go, because memory felt too fragile, because photography, that strange new art of light and chemistry, offered one last bargain with mortality. The body may decay, the voice may vanish, the room may empty, but the face can remain. And so, in those faded portraits, we are not seeing a morbid people obsessed with corpses. We are seeing bereaved people standing at the edge of loss, reaching for the only form of immortality they could afford. A small photograph, a locked case, a child's face in silver shadow, a final image before the dark closed in. And perhaps that is the real ghost in every Victorian post-mortem photograph. Not the dead person staring back, but the living hand that could not bear to let them vanish. Thank you for joining me tonight on Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. If this story left a chill in the room, or made the past feel a little closer than comfort allows, then subscribe for more strange history, dark folklore, and forgotten mysteries from the shadowed corners of the world. Until next time, keep the candle burning low, and be careful what old photographs you stare at for too long.